Snow had fallen upon Baker Street in a fine, persistent powder that muffled the wheels of cabs and turned the evening's traffic into a slow, whispering crawl. Inside the familiar sitting room, the coal burned with a steady glow, and Holmes, long-limbed and ascetic, had arranged upon the table a small miscellany of objects whose connection escaped ordinary minds. Watson, who had returned late from his rounds, observed the display with amused resignation. A theatre program creased at the corners, a length of black silk cord knotted and re-knotted, a pinch of glittering dust that caught the firelight, and, laid upon the mantel, a card bearing a gilt sphinx, the device of the Egyptian Hall in Piccadilly. Holmes said nothing at first. He twirled the cord idly, and at length held it up between finger and thumb. "There are 4 mistakes present," he murmured. 4. In a mere cord. "In a mere knot," he returned, placing the loop upon the program as if crowning it. "But the evening will not allow us so leisurely a lesson. Put on your coat, Watson. Lestrade is on his way with a case that will not wait." It was characteristic that Holmes should declare the inspector's approach before the familiar rapping sounded below. Moments later, the rapid tread upon the stairs was followed by Lestrade's appearance, sharp-featured, businesslike, his boots powdered with snow and his manner bustling with the self-importance that attends a messenger of calamity. "You were expecting me, Mr. Holmes," said Lestrade, half irritated, half relieved. "Well, I have not come for pleasantries. There's a dead man at the Egyptian Hall, killed, it seems, by his own trick, and if ever there was devilry done in full view of a respectable audience, this is it." Holmes's eyes brightened. "The Illusionist?" "A foreign gentleman who calls himself the Great Mallory. Though I am told that is not his true name. Cessus, he performed a set of contrivances tonight, ending with a cabinet escape advertised as his final trick. A glass-fronted box, locked fast, hands bound. He was to free himself and reappear amongst the gallery in a puff of smoke. The smoke came, the reappearance did not. When his men opened the cabinet behind the curtain, he was inside it, dead." "Cause?" Holmes asked. Lestrade shrugged. "No mark of violence. Doctor at the theatre spoke of a stoppage of the heart. The public is in a frenzy. Some fool shouted murder. The manager swears it was a tragic seizure. I want it settled quickly. You know how London eats a scandal." Holmes slipped into his greatcoat with a swift, economical motion. "And the mistakes, Watson," he added, tapping the cord, "are coming with us." The Egyptian Hall stood brilliant and brazen against the soft blotting of snow, its entrance lamps flaring and its notice boards fluttering with bills printed in extravagant type, now streaked darkly by the weather. The police had cleared the pavement, but a ragged fringe of onlookers lingered, exchanging rumors in low tones. Within, the atmosphere smelt of gas, stale cigar smoke, and the sharp dust peculiar to theatres, the scent of velvet, paint, and trickery. Watson followed Holmes down a corridor hung with scenic backcloths into the wings, where the staff had huddled in anxious knots while a constable kept a tight watch on a curtained enclosure. The manager, a stout man with a waxed mustache whose points drooped under the damp, stepped forward wringing his hands. "Mr. Holmes, I beg you, this must be resolved without the newspapers." He dabbed his brow. "Mallory was a sensation. The audience came for him. Without his name, we are an empty cabinet." Holmes's gaze had already gone past the man to the apparatus. The cabinet stood with its glass frontage cracked in a starburst. The interior was lined with padded velvet, and Watson noted, even at a glance, that the cushions bore impressions as if from the pressure of a body against them. A coil of black silk cord lay upon the floor, severed more than untied. A set of gleaming padlocks sat on a velvet tray, their tongues protruding like insolent smiles. "Who cut the cord?" asked Holmes. "One of the assistants, sir," said Lestrade. "They feared for his life and slashed everything to get him out. But it was too late. Dr. Lavington, there by the footlights, declared him gone. If there's poison, It was cleverly done. Holmes knelt, his long fingers hovering just shy of contact with the glass and the metal. He peered at the frame, inhaled near the latch, then, to Watson's puzzlement, leaned his cheek lightly to the inside of the door as if to feel some whisper of temperature or vibration left by the performance. Rising, he looked about at the ground, a scatter of pale particles like powdered glass or mica, a tiny grease mark upon the stage's edge, and, near the curtain pulley, a faint smear of red that was neither paint nor blood, but something like crimson wax. "Who operated the smoke?" he asked over his shoulder. A young man with anxious eyes, one of Mallory's assistants, stepped forward. "I did, sir. A cartridge we burn in the pan. The cue is 3 knocks from within the cabinet." "And tonight?" "3 knocks, sir. Then smoke. Then nothing." The audience clapped, and then someone screamed. Holmes's gaze sharpened. The audience. "Who sat in the second row of the stalls, left of the central aisle, seat E7? The manager blinked. "How in heaven? Why, a banker. I have the name in the book. Mr. Fairchild of Lombard Street. But how? Because the ash upon the rail is of a Trichinopoly cigar cut with a banker's penknife, and there is the immoderate crease of a program where a man folds it to the exact measure of his patience." Holmes's tone was airy, but Watson saw the old, electric attention alive in him. He turned to Lestrade. "You will keep Mr. Fairchild from going too far to bed tonight. I may have questions regarding a certain wager laid before the curtain rose." If this apparently irrelevant remark surprised the inspector, he was careful not to show it. "We can hold him if you advise it." "For the moment," Holmes said, "a word will suffice." They approached the body, which lay upon a trestle behind the curtain, respectfully covered to the chest. Mallory's face, narrow, aquiline, pale, wore a faint, fixed expression of superiority, as if he would even now declare the deception and expect applause. Watson, examining as far as propriety allowed, saw no discoloration about the lips nor puncture upon the skin. The nails were clean, there was a faint dusting of glitter upon the hair, and a peculiar scent lingered, pleasant, camphorous, with an undernote he could not immediately place. Holmes, with a nod from Lestrade, examined the hands. A faint trace of resin clung to the fingertips, as if the man had handled a violin bow, or more likely a rope that demanded grip in slick conditions. Upon the left wrist, just beneath where the cord had bound him, there remained a shallow impression not of silk, but of something flatter and more rigid. He inspected the inside of the collar and found, to his evident satisfaction, a speck of something white lodged at the seam. "Stage chalk," Watson suggested. "Chalk, certainly. Stage chalk, possibly." Holmes pocketed the speck. "Who are his assistants?" "There are 3, said the manager. "Cole, whom you have heard. Miss Ada LaRue, his partner, and Mr. Peregrine Blythe, a mechanist." "Send me Miss LaRue." She came as summoned, a woman of precise beauty with dark hair and a costume that suggested both grace and careful calculation. Her eyes were steady, yet not so steady as to conceal the redness at their rims. "Miss LaRue," said Holmes, "you were with Mr. Mallory throughout the performance?" "On stage, yes. He had been anxious all day. He said tonight's was to be his last London performance for a time, and that he would leave them wanting more." "His final trick," Holmes murmured. "Was it modified for this evening?" She hesitated. He added a flourish. He said the reappearance would be not where they look, but where they feel. I pressed him for sense, but he only smiled. Holmes inclined his head toward the cabinet. "He bound himself before you?" "I tied the first knot. He finished it as he always did. He could manage it with his fingers, even behind his back. It was his pride." Holmes lifted the severed cord. "Your first knot is a reef. What he finished with, however, is a poor imitation of a bowline turned wrong side on. No sailor would own it. That is one mistake. The other 3 we shall keep for later." Watson had come to recognize this tone as a sign that Holmes's mind had found, if not the path, then at least the hedgerow that marked it. He glanced toward Lestrade, who was instructing the constables to keep all stagehands in the green room until released. The audience had been dismissed, the house emptied in murmurs, and the snowfall beyond the glass doors had thickened, giving to the theatre's gaslight a kind of suspended stillness. "Is there any rival," Holmes asked the manager abruptly, "who would benefit from Mallory's catastrophe?" The man sputtered. Then, seeing Holmes's unblinking expression, he sighed. "They're all rivals, Mr. Holmes. There's a fellow at the Alhambra who has copied half our card wonders. There's a Frenchman at the Palace who claims to call spirits and writes billets in the dark. And, if you will have gossip, the banker you named staked a considerable sum on some outcome tonight. I do not know what." Holmes's smile was slight and razor-thin. "Then our evening has company, money, rivalry, and a mechanism that pretends to do what it cannot. You will lock this cabinet, Inspector, and permit no meddling hands. I shall examine it in the morning with proper light." "In the morning?" Lestrade protested. "Unless you want me to tell you only what a tired mind will say tonight. We have enough for our beginnings. The man who dies in a conjurer's box does not die by chance. The audience is meant to look at the smoke while the deed is done elsewhere. We must ask, not how he failed to appear, but where he was always intended to be." Watson, who felt the first cool fingers of excitement touch his spine, looked from the cracked glass to the velvet-lined interior, to the faint smear of crimson near the pulley. He could not yet fit them together, and yet he recognized in Holmes's calm the soundless click of pieces turning into place. Outside, the snow continued to fall, and in the hush that followed, the great Mallory's fixed smile seemed to harden, as if some secret jest lay upon it still, unshared with any but the man who had contrived it. The following morning dawned gray and windless. The snow along Baker Street hardened into rutted channels where wheels had passed. Holmes stood before the fire, already dressed for the day, a magnifying lens dangling from his fingers like a pendulum of thought. On the table lay the cracked padlock from the Egyptian hall, and a small glass vial containing a residue the color of ground pearl. "You see, Watson," he said, "the human mind delights in illusion not because it wishes to be deceived, but because it wishes to believe that there is meaning where none exists. That is why conjurers thrive, and why murderers may hide among them." Watson, who was sipping his coffee, could not tell if this reflection referred to the dead illusionist or to mankind in general. Before he could ask, a cab rattled to a stop outside, and moments later Lestrade entered, the morning paper in hand. Its headline proclaimed, "The Great Mallory's Death. Public demands inquiry." "Your advice about keeping the cabinet under lock was timely," said Lestrade. "But there's something new. The theatre's machinist, Blythe, has vanished. Left before dawn, his lodgings were empty save for an envelope addressed to Miss Leroux." Holmes took the letter with an air of grim anticipation. It contained a single playing card, the Queen of Hearts, upon which had been scrawled in hurried pencil, "It was not supposed to end this way." "Curious," murmured Holmes. "Not a confession, but a lament. Observe the smudge along the margin. Engineer's grease. He wrote this within the theatre after handling machinery. We shall find him soon enough." They arrived once more at the Egyptian hall, where the scent of last night's smoke still clung to the curtains. Holmes directed the attendants to draw back the stage lights and examine the cabinet anew. The fractured pane caught the light, and a faint trail of residue sparkled upon its inner lip. "Magnesium," said Holmes softly. "Used in stage lighting and flashes. Our illusionist's final trick, it seems, included a flash potent enough to blind every eye in the house. He scraped the residue onto a slip of paper. A brilliant distraction. Literally. But to what end?" Watson examined the floor. "Perhaps to conceal the means of his death." "Just so, but we must decide whether the victim was author or audience of that deception." Holmes moved to the curtain pulley, where he had noticed the red smear. From his pocket he withdrew a penknife, scraping at the stain until it flaked away. Sealing wax, he said, stamped with a crest, the outline of a crown and serpent intertwined. Does that symbol speak to you, Lestrade? The inspector frowned. It might belong to the Orphean Society, an association of stage magicians. Mallory was one of them, though he'd quarreled with its committee months ago. Indeed, said Holmes, a society built on secrecy. They pride themselves on guarding the mechanics of illusion. How apt that one of their own should perish inside his own secret. While Lestrade dispatched a constable to confirm the emblem, Holmes knelt before the cabinet's base. His fingers explored a narrow seam where the wood met the stage, and suddenly a soft click answered his touch. A concealed panel slid open to reveal a hollow space lined with metal, large enough to conceal a small cylinder. "Watson, your eyes," he said. "Note the faint burn marks. A chemical reaction, perhaps. Something ignited here at the moment of the flash." He lifted a warped brass tube, scorched at one end. Within it, a whiff of the same camphorous scent they had noticed on the body escaped into the air. "Camphor and cyanide of mercury," Holmes declared. "Combined under heat, they yield a vapor, most deadly when confined. Our illusionist was not murdered by blade or bullet, but by his own apparatus, unless someone altered it." "Blythe?" Watson asked. "Possibly, or someone who knew Blythe's trust in routine." Holmes replaced the cylinder carefully. The flash concealed more than the failure. It masked the moment of substitution. Someone changed the powder, ensuring that when Mallory performed his grand escape, he would breathe his own death. A rustle at the wings drew their attention. Miss LaRue stood there, pale, clutching the folded newspaper. "You must find him," she said. "Mr. Blythe. He was frightened last night. He said there were people watching from the balcony who were not there to applaud." "Describe them," Holmes urged. "One wore a velvet mask," she whispered. "Another, a tall man in grey, never clapped once. Mr. Mallory noticed them too. He said they had come to collect a debt of silence." Holmes's eyes gleamed with sudden energy. The Orphean Society, indeed. They deal harshly with members who reveal their secrets. "Watson, we shall dine late tonight. There is a meeting advertised for illusionists at a certain Soho cellar. Entry by password and candlelight. We will attend, though I fear their stage may be less hospitable than the Egyptian hall." As the theatre's gaslights dimmed behind them, Holmes paused at the door and glanced back toward the lifeless cabinet. "A man may hide his trick from the world, Watson, but he cannot hide from truth. It has the inconvenient habit of performing encores." That evening, as the fog thickened along the embankment, Holmes and I found ourselves descending a narrow stairway behind a shuttered tobacconist in Soho. The air was close and stale, heavy with the odor of tallow and cheap brandy. At the bottom, a door marked only by a painted crescent admitted us into a long, low cellar illuminated by a ring of candles. Around a table sat half a dozen men and 2 women, all dressed in dark evening clothes, their faces partially concealed by half-masks of black satin. A pale man with an angular jaw presided at the head, a silver serpent clasp pinned to his lapel. Holmes had altered his appearance with remarkable subtlety. His hair brushed forward, his eyes shaded by blue spectacles, and his beard trimmed to a neat point. He passed among the group as though one of their number. I followed, my heart hammering with the uneasy knowledge that our deception, if discovered, would likely prove fatal. The chairman rapped the table once. "The meeting of the Orphean Society is called to order. The first matter, Mallory. You have all heard of his death." A murmur of assent passed round the table. One of the women leaned forward. "He broke the covenant. He performed the vanishing cabinet for the public. He was warned what that would bring." "Warnings," the chairman said coldly, "were insufficient. The council demanded an example. He intended to take his secrets abroad, to America. That could not be permitted." Holmes's voice cut across the silence, low and deliberate. "Then you confess it was done by design?" Several heads turned sharply. Who are you to question the society? The chairman demanded. Holmes removed his spectacles. A student of human deceit, he replied, and one who dislikes to see murder excused as principal. A ripple of recognition moved through the room. Holmes, the woman whispered, her mask tilting slightly. The detective. The atmosphere thickened at once. The chairman rose, his hand drifting toward his coat pocket, but Holmes was faster. With a sudden movement, he tossed the candle nearest him onto the table, and in the brief flare of light and smoke, he pulled me toward the exit. Shouts followed. Someone lunged. I felt a blow glance off my shoulder as we reached the stair. Holmes slammed the door behind us and wedged a chair beneath the handle. Quickly, Watson, this way. He darted into the alley, his steps sure even in the dark. We ran until the fog swallowed the sound of pursuit, stopping only beneath the lamplight of Dean Street where a hansom waited. Inside the cab, Holmes leaned back, his breath steady though his eyes gleamed with cold intensity. Confirmation, Watson, precisely as I suspected. The Orphean Society executed Mallory for betrayal, but they did not anticipate that another hand would exploit their punishment for private gain. Another hand? Blythe. He tampered with the mechanism, not to obey the Society's decree, but to settle his own account. Mallory's death suited them both. The Society's vengeance cloaked his crime. Then Blythe fled out of guilt? Or fear? He knows the Orpheans will not forgive his presumption. They will silence him as they silenced Mallory. We reached Baker Street past midnight. Holmes wasted no time. From his drawer, he withdrew the card bearing the serpent and crown, studying it under the lamp. A signet impression, he murmured. The crest was once the personal device of Lord Calverton, founder of the Society. He keeps his rooms at Albany, seldom seen in public, but reputed to fund many of London's more unorthodox entertainments. He turned to me suddenly. You recall the banker, Fairchild? The man in seat E7? He and Calverton share a line of credit through the same firm. I fancy Fairchild's wager last night was not on a trick's success, but on a life's ending. He staked upon certainty. A knock interrupted us. Lestrade entered, snow melting upon his shoulders. News, Mr. Holmes. They've found Blythe. Alive. Barely. He was discovered in a boarding house near the docks, poisoned. A note beside him reads, "The debt collected." Holmes's expression hardened. The Orpheans have covered their trail, but too hastily. The substance used will betray them. Bring me the vial at once, Lestrade, and instruct your men to guard Miss Leroux. She will be the next to vanish if we delay. Lestrade nodded and departed. Holmes moved to the window, gazing out at the drifting flakes that softened the lamplight below. This case, Watson, is like a conjurer's act reversed. Every curtain lifted reveals another layer of deception, but the final trick, I think, has yet to be played. The clock struck 2. Somewhere in the city, a carriage rolled through the slush, carrying a woman who knew too much, and a secret that might, before dawn, cost her life. The morning broke with a watery sun that did little to dispel the chill left by the night's fog. I found Holmes seated at the breakfast table, untouched coffee beside him, his violin lying silent on the settee. His gaze was fixed upon a slip of paper beneath the lens of his microscope. Without turning, he said quietly, "The poison that killed Blythe, Watson, is identical to the compound I found in the Illusionist's cabinet. Camphor and mercury cyanide, precisely mixed. It confirms our theory. The Orphean Society cleans its stage with fatal efficiency." He straightened, the restless energy that usually attended discovery quickening his manner. Yet there is something more curious. The trace of wax on the vial, see here, bears the impression of the same serpent seal as before, but it differs slightly in contour. Not a duplication, but a variant, as if struck from a second ring, which suggests 2 men bearing the same authority or one impostor assuming it. Before I could comment, the bell rang. Mrs. Hudson admitted Miss Ada LaRue, veiled and trembling, her gloved hands clenched about a folded note. "Mr. Holmes," she said breathlessly. "I was followed. A man in a grey coat waited across from my lodging this morning. He disappeared when I left, but this was slipped beneath my door." Holmes took the note delicately. It was written in a bold, unfamiliar hand. "The truth performs at noon. Attend the Egyptian Hall. Come alone or the curtain falls forever." Holmes's eyes flashed with an excitement that bordered on danger. "A summons, Watson, cleverly baited. They wish her to come alone, which tells us they fear interference. We shall oblige them in our own fashion." Within the hour, we were en route to Piccadilly. Holmes had disguised himself once more, this time as an elderly stagehand with a stoop and an uneven gait, his features obscured by soot and false whiskers. I accompanied Miss LaRue in the guise of an attending physician, ostensibly for her nerves. The theatre stood shuttered, its front draped in mourning cloth, but the side door admitted us easily enough, left ajar as if in invitation. Inside, the hall lay dim and hollow, every sound swallowed by dust and velvet. The gas lamps burned low, throwing long, wavering shadows across the deserted seats. Holmes signaled for silence. We moved towards the stage, where the cabinet still stood, restored, gleaming, and ominously pristine. On the footlights lay an envelope addressed simply to Ada LaRue. Holmes motioned her to remain back while he examined it. As he lifted the flap, a faint metallic click sounded. In an instant, he flung the envelope to the floor and stepped aside. A dart hissed past, striking the stage pillar and quivering there, its tip glistening with clear fluid. "Poison," Holmes muttered grimly. "A less courteous invitation than I prefer." From the shadows above came the echo of slow clapping. A man stepped into view upon the gallery rail, a tall figure in a dove-grey coat, face obscured by a half-mask of silver. His voice carried clearly through the empty house. "You meddle in affairs beyond your stage, Mr. Holmes. The dead are content. Why rouse them?" Holmes's tone was deceptively mild. "Because the living deserve to know who directs their tragedies. You murdered Blythe." "I?" The man laughed softly. "He served his role. He tampered where he should not. The society corrected him, as it will you." Holmes's hand slipped within his coat. "And Miss LaRue, is she another lesson?" "She is the audience. Every show requires one." At that, Holmes drew a small pistol, not to fire, but to shatter the gas jet beside the stage. Darkness fell instantly. A cry echoed, followed by the rush of footsteps above. I saw Holmes vault onto the platform, moving with feline precision through the gloom. When the lamps were relit moments later, the gallery was empty, but a scrap of fabric, torn from the fleeing man's coat, hung upon a nail by the rail. Holmes retrieved it with quiet satisfaction. "Grey velvet," he murmured, "and faintly scented with my old acquaintance's perfume, eau de bergamot and sandalwood. Lord Calverton himself." Miss LaRue clutched the edge of the stage. "Then he ordered Mallory's death." Holmes turned to her, his expression sharp yet sympathetic. "Ordered it, yes, but not for betrayal of their craft. Mallory held something far more valuable than illusion. A ledger, a record of payments from men who wagered on his tricks, including one banker named Fairchild. And now, Miss LaRue, they believe you know where it is." She shook her head, tears glistening in the low light. "He told me once. If harm came to him, the truth was hidden behind the mirror of the stage. I thought it a metaphor." Holmes's eyes narrowed. "No metaphor at all. Watson, fetch my knife. We are about to lift the final curtain." He strode toward the rear of the stage, where a tall gilt mirror stood propped among the scenery. With a swift motion, he pried at the frame, revealing a hollow recess. Inside lay a leather-bound book, its clasp sealed with red wax and stamped with the serpent crest. Holmes exhaled, a sound between triumph and dread. "The ledger of the Orphean Society," he said softly, "and within it, the names of every man who paid for illusion with another's life." Outside, a carriage wheel screeched sharply against the curb, followed by a shout and the unmistakable crack of a pistol. Holmes's head snapped toward the sound. "Too late for subtlety," he said, drawing his revolver. "They have come for their property, and we, Watson, are still upon their stage." The crack of the pistol shot reverberated through the theater like thunder in a cathedral. Holmes extinguished the nearest gaslight with a sweep of his sleeve, plunging us into half-shadow. "Down!" he hissed. The next instant, a bullet shattered the mirror beside him, fragments cascading like glittering rain upon the stage. Miss LaRue gasped, clutching the fallen ledger to her chest as Holmes pulled her toward the wings. I drew my revolver, peering through the gloom. A door at the back burst open, and the silhouette of a man loomed against the faint light from the alley, tall, broad-shouldered, and unmistakably purposeful. Holmes moved before I could fire. With the precision of a fencer, he hurled a stage sandbag from the rigging above. It struck the boards with a thunderous crash, scattering the assailant's aim. "This way, Watson!" he shouted. We dashed along the corridor leading to the dressing rooms, our footsteps echoing through the labyrinth of narrow passages. Behind us came the scuffle of pursuit, the creak of floorboards and the low whistle of air as another shot ricocheted off the wall beside my ear. Holmes turned sharply into a side chamber and slammed the door. The room was lined with dusty costumes and props, painted masks, swords, and canes leaning against cracked mirrors. He dragged a wardrobe across the threshold just as the knob rattled violently from the other side. "We have 30 seconds, no more," he murmured. "Watson, the window!" I forced it open. The cold air of the alley rushed in, carrying the bitter scent of horse dung and coal smoke. Holmes gestured for Miss LaRue to climb through first. She hesitated only a moment before obeying, clutching the ledger beneath her cloak. As I helped her down, the door behind us splintered, a hand reaching through. Holmes turned, struck it with the butt of his pistol, and vaulted out after us. We landed in the narrow lane behind the theater, just as the wardrobe crashed inward. "Quickly," Holmes said, taking Miss LaRue's arm. "They will not pursue far in public view, but they will not abandon the chase while that ledger remains in her possession." He hailed a cab already idling by the corner, thrust us inside, and gave the driver curt directions. "To Scotland Yard, via the embankment, and drive as though the devil himself were giving chase." The cab lurched forward, wheels slipping on the icy cobbles. Through the fogged glass, I saw the faint shape of another carriage behind us, keeping its distance but never faltering. Holmes observed it too, his expression grimly satisfied. "Predictable," he muttered. "They wish to recover the ledger without spectacle. That, Watson, is our advantage." Miss LaRue sat pale and silent, her fingers tightening around the book. "Mr. Holmes," she whispered, "what if they find us first?" "They shall find something," Holmes replied calmly, "but not what they seek." He took the ledger from her, examining the serpent seal. "Wax still pliant. Good. Watson, my penknife." With deft precision, he slit the binding just enough to extract the first page. "A decoy will suffice for now." He handed the page to Miss LaRue and tucked the book beneath his coat. "If they overtake us, you will give them this. They will believe it intact and depart. Meanwhile, we shall ensure the true record reaches the yard." The cab rounded into the Strand, hooves clattering. The second carriage quickened. I caught sight of a gloved hand raising a pistol through its window. Holmes rapped the roof. "Driver, turn at once, down to the river." The startled man obeyed, swerving sharply into a fog-wreathed side street. The pursuing vehicle overshot the corner with a shout and vanished into the haze. Moments later, we emerged upon the embankment. Holmes ordered the cab to stop beneath the shadow of the bridge. "They will regain our trail soon enough." he said. "We finish on foot." We made our way along the river wall, the Thames black and silent beside us. The lights of Westminster flickered faintly through the mist. Holmes walked briskly, pausing only to glance behind once or twice. Then suddenly, he halted. "Do you hear that?" I strained to listen. Somewhere above the steady lapping of the tide came a faint, rhythmic tapping, 3 measured knocks, repeating at intervals. "Not pursuit," Holmes murmured. "A signal, the same cadence used in Mallory's final trick." His voice hardened. "They are mocking us, or warning us. Either way, they know where we are." A shadow detached itself from the archway ahead. Lord Calverton stepped into the pale lamplight, immaculate as ever in his grey coat, a silver-topped cane glinting in his hand. "You have something of mine, Mr. Holmes," he said softly. "Return it, and perhaps the lady may keep her life." Holmes's reply was calm, almost conversational. "I think, my lord, it is you who will be returning something. Your freedom." He signaled with his hand, and from the fog behind us emerged 2 figures, Lestrade and a constable, revolvers drawn. The shock upon Calverton's face was momentary, but it was enough. Holmes stepped forward, producing the ledger. "Your society is finished," he said. "Blythe's death gave you away, the poison traced to your chemist, the seal to your ring. Every illusion leaves a fingerprint, my lord, and you, I fear, have performed your last." Calverton's gaze flicked to Miss Leroux, then to the river. For an instant I thought he would surrender, but instead, with astonishing swiftness, he turned and leapt over the parapet. There was a cry, a splash, and then only the swirling current beneath the bridge. Holmes leaned over the wall, the fog swirling about him. "A fitting exit for an illusionist," he said quietly. "He vanishes, and the river keeps his secret." Then, straightening, he turned to Lestrade. "Send divers at dawn, but I doubt you'll find him. Some men never stop performing." The ledger, now safely in his hands, glimmered faintly under the gaslight as Holmes tucked it beneath his arm. "Come, Watson," he said. "The curtain has fallen, but the applause, I suspect, will be most reluctant to end." The fog clung to the river until dawn, swallowing all trace of the man who had vanished beneath it. When the divers finally descended into the murky depths at Holmes's instruction, they returned with nothing. No coat, no cane, no body. Holmes observed their report without comment, his hands folded behind his back as he gazed over the slow, churning current. "As I predicted," he murmured. "The Orphean Society never leaves its performers upon the stage once the act is done." We returned to Baker Street in silence, Miss Leroux now under police protection and the ledger secured in Lestrade's custody. Yet even as Holmes lit his pipe and settled into his chair, I sensed the restlessness in him, the peculiar tension that comes not from failure, but from incompletion. "You do not believe Calverton is dead," I said at last. Holmes smiled faintly through the smoke. "Dead, my dear Watson, is a word too final for a man who rehearsed deception for a living. No, he has merely taken his bow elsewhere. Observe." He pointed to the corner of the hearth, where lay a small, damp scrap of parchment I had not noticed before. Holmes lifted it delicately with the tongs. It was wedged within the ledger's clasp, a message written in invisible ink that the river's moisture has kindly revealed. He held it closer to the flame. The letters darkened into visibility. The final performance begins where the first illusion was born. Holmes's eyes gleamed. "Mallory began his career, Watson, at the Paragon Theatre in Limehouse, a den of trickery and second-rate conjurers. That is where Calverton will retreat, or where his allies will finish what he began. Lestrade must think the curtain down, but for us, the play continues." By late afternoon, we found ourselves threading through the narrow, soot-streaked streets of Limehouse. The Paragon was a sorry sight, its once gaudy facade flaking and its poster frames empty, save for a tattered bill announcing a new act. The marvelous mirror illusions. One night only. Holmes stopped short. Curious, is it not? A mirror again. The very symbol of their deceit. Inside, the theatre was nearly deserted, save for a handful of stagehands preparing for the evening's performance. Holmes, claiming to be a booking agent, made swift inquiries. One man, a burly fellow with a crooked jaw, mentioned that a foreign illusionist had rented the stage for rehearsal under a false name, Monsieur Derval. "Describe him," Holmes said quietly. "Tall, wore gloves, even indoors. Spoke little. Paid in gold sovereigns." Holmes's expression sharpened. Calverton, or one acting on his orders. He slipped a coin to the man and gestured toward the wings. "Come, Watson. We shall see what miracle our Monsieur Derval intends to perform tonight." We crept through the dim backstage corridors to the wings. Upon the stage stood an elaborate contraption of mirrors and panels arranged in a semicircle, gleaming faintly under the gas lights. Holmes studied the construction with fascination, his fingers tracing the edge of a frame. Ah, ingenious, a device for simultaneous reflection and concealment, two realities at once. He means to vanish again, not into water this time, but into his own image. A faint creak above made us both glance upward. From the catwalks, a figure watched, motionless, face hidden beneath a hood. Holmes raised his hand, but before he could speak, the mirrors flickered. One by one they began to turn, reflecting our images, and then distorting them. My own reflection blurred, and in its place appeared the likeness of Lord Calverton himself, pale and smiling, though no man stood before us. "Good heavens," I whispered. Holmes's voice was steady. "An optical trick, Watson, projected from behind the glass. He wishes us to believe he's a ghost. But the only spirit haunting this theatre is ambition." A soft, mocking laugh drifted from the catwalk. Then came the hiss of gas, sharp and chemical. Holmes seized my sleeve. "Out, quickly! Cyanide fumes again!" We staggered toward the door as the mirrors shuddered, the machinery within them groaning. The hooded man leapt down from above, landing cat-like before the stage steps. Holmes caught him squarely, and they fell struggling amidst the haze. I fought my way through the fog, my throat burning. When the smoke cleared, Holmes stood, his hand gripping the man's hood. He tore it free, and there, gasping and defeated, was not Calverton, but Fairchild, the banker. Holmes regarded him coolly. "So the financier of illusions becomes the actor in his own fraud. You financed Mallory's death to conceal your debts, then tried to erase the society itself. Calverton was your partner and your scapegoat." Fairchild's eyes darted wildly. "He promised safety. He said he would vanish us both." Holmes's gaze hardened. "And vanish he did. You were the decoy, Fairchild, not the magician." Moments later, the police burst in at Holmes's signal. Lestrade, summoned by telegram earlier that afternoon, led the arrest. Holmes handed him the ruined mirrors and the fragments of the projection device. "Evidence enough," he said. "Fairchild will find the law less forgiving than the audience he tried to deceive." As they led the man away, Holmes turned back to the shattered reflections. "A fitting end, Watson," he murmured. "Every illusion depends upon the spectator's desire to believe. But when truth takes the stage, even the cleverest conjurer finds his tricks reduced to smoke." We stepped out into the fading twilight, the last light glinting off the broken glass behind us. Holmes paused, drawing his coat tighter against the wind. Calverton is still out there," he said quietly. "A man who can vanish once will attempt it again. And when he does," he glanced toward the darkening river, "I intend to be waiting in the wings." 2 days had passed since the arrest at the Paragon Theatre, yet Holmes's restlessness had only deepened. Though Fairchild's confession had sealed the banker's fate, my friend's keen instincts remained unsatisfied. He moved about our sitting room like a man haunted by an unfinished melody, his violin lying untouched while the morning papers lay scattered, all bearing headlines of "The Orphean Conspiracy Unmasked." "Superficial praise, Watson," he muttered, folding one paper with disdain. "They applaud the finale, yet they do not perceive the missing act. Fairchild was a pawn, an important one, yes, but not the mind behind the illusion. Calverton remains the puppeteer." "But surely, Holmes," I said, "if the man lives, he is in hiding far from London by now." Holmes looked up sharply. "A reasonable assumption. Too reasonable, in fact." "No, my dear fellow, men like Calverton do not flee. They transform. The Orphean Society's true genius was never vanishing, it was substitution. Each trick depended upon convincing the audience that absence meant death, when in truth it meant disguise." Before I could reply, a sharp knock came at the door. Lestrade entered, his usual briskness dimmed by unease. "Holmes, you'll want to hear this. We've had reports from Gravesend, a body washed ashore near the docks. The locals swear it's the man you're after." Holmes's eyes gleamed with that strange light of mingled curiosity and suspicion. "I had expected him to reappear," he murmured, "but perhaps even illusionists cannot outwit the Thames forever." We accompanied Lestrade by train, reaching the riverfront before noon. The wind carried the briny tang of low tide as constables stood gathered near a tarpaulin-covered form. Holmes lifted the edge carefully. The body beneath was that of a man, grey-haired, features bloated by the water, yet unmistakably dressed in a fine grey coat. A silver ring, bearing the serpent and crown insignia, gleamed upon one finger. Lestrade exhaled. "There's your Lord Calverton. The current did for him, after all." Holmes's tone was cool, so it would appear, but rivers, Lestrade, are poor judges of truth. He examined the hands, frowning. "Note, Watson, the fingernails, too clean for a man submerged 2 days. The coat's lining is new, the stitching uneven, as though tailored in haste. And this ring, observe the crest's engraving. The serpent coils to the left, not the right. A forgery." "You mean—" "I mean," said Holmes, straightening, "that this corpse was never Lord Calverton. It was prepared to become him. Someone arranged this discovery precisely to end the pursuit." Lestrade stared. "Then where is the real one?" Holmes's gaze drifted toward the horizon, where a steamer's whistle echoed faintly. "On that sound, Inspector. The Ariadne sails for Antwerp within the hour. Calverton would not linger to watch his own obituary. He would travel under a false identity, perhaps even in plain sight of the man sent to verify his death." Within minutes, we were aboard a hired launch, cutting across the grey waves toward the departing steamer. Holmes stood at the bow, his coat whipping in the wind, eyes fixed on the vessel ahead. "He plays the same trick again," he said, almost to himself. "Only this time, Watson, the illusionist believes the audience too weary to notice." We caught the Ariadne just before she cleared the estuary. Lestrade's badge secured us entry, and we began to search among the passengers. Holmes moved swiftly, scanning faces, hands, and luggage with a predator's focus. Suddenly, he stopped beside a tall, bearded man leaning on the rail, reading a foreign newspaper. The man glanced up and froze. "Good afternoon, Lord Calverton," Holmes said quietly. For a heartbeat, there was silence. Then, with startling grace, the man vaulted the railing, plunging into the water below. Holmes cursed softly and signaled the sailors, who tossed a rope into the churning wake. Moments later, the fugitive resurfaced, gasping, and was dragged aboard. His beard came away in Holmes's grasp, revealing the unmistakable face of the missing aristocrat, pale, furious, and utterly defeated. Back in the cabin, soaked and shivering, Calverton met Holmes's gaze with a wry smile. "You are relentless, Mr. Holmes. Had I known the world held such a man, I would have retired from illusion long ago." Holmes regarded him evenly. Your illusions have left corpses in their wake, my lord. Mallory, Blythe, Fairchild, all sacrificed for your vanity. The Orphean Society may die with you, but its stain will not fade easily. Calverton's eyes flickered with something almost like admiration. Perhaps, in another life, you would have made a fine conjurer. Holmes allowed himself a faint smile. And you, perhaps, a passable detective. Unfortunately, both professions require an honest hand. Lestrade's men took him into custody as the steamer turned back toward London. Holmes leaned against the railing, lighting his pipe despite the wind. The case is complete, Watson. The master of illusion exposed at last. Yet I confess, there is a certain melancholy in ending such artistry, even when it was devoted to crime. Calverton understood the human hunger for wonder. It was his genius and his downfall alike. He turned toward me, the faintest wisp of smoke curling from his lips. There is, I think, a lesson in that, for detectives and magicians both. The truth, however plain, must always wait for its proper cue. As the Thames widened before us and the evening sun broke weakly through the clouds, I saw in Holmes's face that curious stillness that comes only when a case has truly ended. Yet I could not shake the feeling that somewhere, behind the curtain of London's fog, another illusion was already preparing to begin. The following evening found Baker Street bathed in the amber glow of the fire, the fog outside pressing thick against the windows. Holmes sat in his chair, silent and withdrawn, his fingertips steepled beneath his chin. The events aboard the Ariadne had reached every paper in London, and Calverton's arrest was heralded as the final act of the Orphean affair. Yet I had learned through long acquaintance that my friend was least at peace when the world declared his work complete. "You are uneasy, Holmes," I observed. "Surely there can be no doubt now. Calverton's confession leaves nothing unresolved." Holmes's lips curved faintly. "Confession, yes. Resolution, no." His words were artfully chosen. He admitted guilt enough to satisfy Lestrade, yet too carefully measured for truth. There was calculation even in his surrender. A conjurer never lets the audience see the true ending, Watson. Only the curtain. Before I could reply, a firm knock echoed from below, followed by hurried footsteps. Mrs. Hudson ushered in a young constable, his face pale with excitement. "Beg pardon, Mr. Holmes. Urgent message from Scotland Yard. Lord Calverton was found dead in his cell an hour ago." Holmes's eyes opened fully, sharp as drawn steel. "Dead? How?" "Poison, sir. The doctor believes he ingested it before his arrest. Something slow-acting. There was this note beside him." The constable handed over a folded scrap of paper. Holmes took it, unfolded it carefully, and read aloud. "An illusion ends when the audience stops believing. Farewell, Mr. Holmes." A silence hung between us, broken only by the hiss of the fire. Holmes rose and began to pace. Curious, is it not, that a man so precise as Calverton would rely upon such a vulgar method of exit? No vial was found, I presume. "None, sir," the constable replied. "His cell was searched twice. He took nothing but a silver ring and a matchbox from his person." Holmes turned sharply. "A matchbox? Did anyone test it?" The constable blinked. It was ordinary, empty. Holmes smiled grimly. "Empty, yes, but not innocent. The inner lid, perhaps, was coated with the residue of the compound he favored, mercuric cyanide mixed with camphor. He needed only moisture to release the fumes. Ingenious and entirely in keeping with his character." After the constable departed, Holmes stood at the window, gazing out into the yellow mist curling above the gaslights. So the puppet cuts his own strings before the hand behind him can be revealed. "You believe someone else aided him?" I asked. "I believe," Holmes said slowly, "that Calverton's death was but another illusion, whether feigned or engineered. The Orphean Society was never the work of one mind. Such precision demands a partnership, a counterweight, and consider, who could supply the chemical without trace? Who could orchestrate the smuggling of the ledger's duplicate into Fairchild's safe? Someone within the yard, perhaps, or close enough to whisper in its corridors. I started. A conspirator inside the law. Or beside it, Holmes murmured. Miss LaRue remains in protective custody, does she not? Yes, under police watch. He turned, his expression thoughtful. Then we must see her tonight. If Calverton's farewell was sincere, she will sleep safely. If not, she is the final witness, and thus the final target. We arrived at the modest lodging house in Bloomsbury shortly before midnight. The constable stationed at the door recognized Holmes instantly and allowed us entry. The building was silent save for the faint ticking of a clock. Holmes moved like a shadow up the narrow staircase, pausing outside Miss LaRue's room. He knocked softly. No answer. He tried again, then exchanged a glance with me before turning the handle. The door opened to darkness. A single candle guttered upon the bedside table, casting a trembling halo of light. The bed was empty. On the coverlet lay her cloak, and beside it, a silver serpent ring identical to Calverton's, the crest coiling to the right. Holmes stepped closer, examining the ring beneath his lens. Not his, he whispered. Hers. And newly worn, the imprint still fresh upon the skin. He looked toward the open window, where the curtain fluttered in the cold night air. A faint indentation marked the sill. Bootprints, small and deliberate, leading outward to the narrow ledge beyond. Gone, I breathed. But why leave the ring? Holmes's eyes darkened. Because she is not fleeing from danger, Watson. She is answering its call. He lifted the ring into the candlelight, and I saw for the first time a tiny inscription within the band. The curtain rises anew. Holmes's jaw tightened. So the final act begins, after all. The society lives through her. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then Holmes extinguished the candle, his voice low but steady. Fetch your coat, Watson. The performance moves to its second stage, and this time, we are not the audience. The cold air bit at our faces as we emerged once more into the fog-drenched street. Holmes strode swiftly along the pavement, his movements charged with a quiet urgency I had seldom seen since our earliest adventures. She has not fled aimlessly, Watson, he said, his tone clipped yet precise. No, Miss LaRue has followed instructions prepared long in advance. That ring was not a token of farewell, but of initiation. She has stepped into Calverton's place. I struggled to keep pace. But to what end, Holmes? The society is scattered, its members imprisoned or dead. What purpose could remain? He halted beneath the pale glow of a gas lamp, his breath clouding in the mist. The purpose that always survives ruin, revenge, or the preservation of power. I believe Miss LaRue was never a mere accomplice. She was Calverton's successor in training. The inscription, "The curtain rises anew," suggests not continuation of their crimes, but transformation, a rebirth. His eyes, gleaming beneath the brim of his hat, turned toward the south. The Orpheans built their illusions on control, of perception, of belief, of fear. But imagine such methods repurposed toward influence more profound than stagecraft. Politics, finance, diplomacy. It is not a troop that rises again, Watson, but an idea. We reached the cab rank at Russell Square, where Holmes ordered a carriage toward the docks. Her trail will lead to the river once more, he explained as we climbed inside. The Orpheans revered water as the medium of transformation, an element of both concealment and rebirth. Recall Calverton's words in his final note. An illusion ends when the audience stops believing. The audience, my dear fellow, has not stopped. It has merely changed seats. The cab rattled through the sleeping city, the lamps smearing across the windows like ghostly fire. When we arrived at the wharf, the tide was low, revealing slick cobblestones and the skeleton of an old pier. A solitary lantern burned near the edge, and in its dim circle of light stood a familiar figure cloaked in dark velvet. Holmes raised a hand, signaling for silence. We approached slowly, our footsteps softened by the damp air. Miss LaRue turned at the sound, her face pale but resolute. The serpent ring, I noted, was gone from her finger. In its place, she held a small leather case, the same size and shape as the ledger we had recovered. "Mr. Holmes," she said, her voice steady, "I wondered how long it would take you." Holmes's reply was quiet, almost compassionate. "You had no need to run, Miss LaRue. The danger ended with Calverton." She smiled faintly. "You still do not see, do you? Calverton's death was not an end. It was a handover. He understood that the world was ready to believe in something new. Illusion, Mr. Holmes, is merely the art of guiding perception. What he began, I shall perfect." "The ledger," Holmes said softly. "You intend to use it?" "To cleanse," she answered. "Those whose wealth and corruption built the Orpheans will pay for it. Not by trial or scandal, but by faith. A single whisper, a planted fear, and they will destroy themselves. I will show London that truth and illusion are but twin faces of the same coin." Her words hung in the night like a spell. Then Holmes stepped closer, his expression unreadable. "You are clever, Miss LaRue, but you forget one principle that governs both theater and crime. Alike, the audience must never see the wires." He moved with lightning speed, seizing her wrist before she could recoil. The case slipped from her grasp and struck the stones, bursting open to reveal not the ledger, but a small glass phial filled with a colorless liquid. "Poison," I breathed. Holmes nodded. A final performance, perhaps. A symbolic rebirth. Or merely Calverton's contingency, should loyalty falter. For a moment, she met his gaze without fear. "You can imprison me, but the curtain has already risen. Others will come." Holmes regarded her gravely. "Perhaps. But every performance requires its audience, and tonight yours departs disappointed." He motioned to the two constables emerging from the shadows, Lestrade among them, summoned by telegram the instant we left Baker Street. As they led her away, Holmes knelt beside the broken case, lifting the phial carefully. "There is artistry in her conviction," he murmured. "A pity she chose illusion over truth. Yet, Watson, observe." He tilted the glass under the lantern's light. Within, the liquid shimmered, not poison, but faint, glittering dust, the same iridescent residue we had found in Mallory's cabinet weeks before. "Stage powder," I said, "for smoke and light." Holmes smiled faintly. "Precisely. Even in betrayal, the illusion remains." He stood, casting one last glance toward the river. The fog rolled thickly now, erasing footprints, swallowing lanterns, restoring London to silence. "The Orpheans are finished, Watson," he said at last. "But what they represented, the hunger to be deceived, will never die. It lies dormant in every mind, awaiting only the next conjurer bold enough to summon it." We turned back toward the waiting cab, the glow of dawn just beginning to bleed through the fog. Holmes walked in thoughtful silence, his coat brushing against mine as he spoke softly, almost to himself. "The world, my dear Watson, is a theater without end, and we, its reluctant players, must ever distinguish the act from the truth." The dawn came pale and soundless, filtering weakly through the fog as our cab rattled back toward Baker Street. Holmes sat motionless beside me, his features half obscured by shadow, the faint gleam of the mysterious phial resting between his fingers. For a long while he said nothing, his eyes distant yet fiercely alive, as though his mind were still reconstructing the final, invisible threads of the case. I knew better than to speak when he was in such a mood. The silence was not absence, but calculation. At last, as the wheels clattered across Oxford Street, he stirred. "Watson, have you ever considered the peculiar persistence of illusion in human affairs?" he said quietly. It is not confined to stages and theaters. Men deceive themselves daily, into hope, into fear, into faith. The Orpheans merely built a temple to that weakness. I nodded. And Miss Leroux sought to turn it into a weapon. Indeed, and therein lies her tragedy. She mistook manipulation for revelation, but still, he paused, turning the file in the faint light. This residue troubles me. If it were truly harmless stage powder, why conceal it in such a manner? Why carry it at all? He held the glass to his nose, inhaled faintly, and frowned. Camphor again, yes, but something more volatile beneath it. A trace of ether, or chloroform perhaps, though I cannot yet be certain. His tone lowered. She meant to use it, Watson, not as poison, but as disguise. Disguise? Holmes tapped the side of the cab impatiently. Consider her demeanor at the docks. She spoke as one confident of control, not desperation. The phial, I suspect, contained a vapor inducing a temporary collapse. Breathless, death-like, but reversible with time and air. A sleight of the body, not of the hand. Had she been alone, she might have enacted Calverton's final trick, her own death, and vanished into the fog. A chill passed through me. Then even now, Holmes smiled grimly. Even now she may live. Lestrade will have taken her to the infirmary. We shall know soon enough whether the Orphean ghost walks again. When we arrived at Baker Street, Holmes sent a telegram to Scotland Yard requesting immediate word of Miss Leroux's condition. He paced the room while awaiting reply, every movement taut with restless precision. Then, not 20 minutes later, the bell rang, and a messenger delivered the return note. Holmes tore it open and scanned the few lines with narrowed eyes. "She is gone," he said simply. "Escaped custody during transfer to the Yard's medical wing. The guards report a faint mist in her cell and a shattered window latch. Nothing more." Then the file was used precisely as I deduced. Holmes flung on his coat. "She has completed the illusion Calverton began, and I fear, Watson, that this city will soon bear witness to her encore." We hurried once more into the streets. The morning had fully broken now, though the fog remained dense as gauze. As we passed through Fleet Street, a paperboy's cry carried faintly through the chill. "Mysterious fire at Egyptian Hall. Police suspect foul play." Holmes stopped abruptly. "Of course," he breathed. "The birthplace of her transformation? The stage upon which the first death was performed? She returns to erase the past entirely." We arrived to find the great facade of the Egyptian Hall wreathed in smoke. Firemen shouted from ladders, and a crowd had gathered, whispering rumors of arson, of phantom lights seen through the upper windows before the blaze began. Holmes moved through the chaos with an uncanny calm, his eyes darting over the ground. "No body reported," he murmured. "No valuables missing. Only the theater records and Mallory's old props destroyed. Symbolic, Watson. She is cleansing the memory of the Orpheans from the world." As we approached the smoldering entrance, an officer emerged carrying a scorched scrap of parchment. "Found this near the stage, sir," he said to Holmes. "Looks like a fragment of a letter." Holmes took it, brushing away ash. The words, though half-burned, were still legible. "When the illusion ends, the truth shall take the stage." Holmes's gaze lingered on the words, and for a long moment he said nothing. Then, in a low voice, he spoke what I had come to recognize as the true conclusion of his reasoning. "She means to reveal them, Watson, not to revive them. Every patron, every accomplice who profited by deceit. She will expose them one by one. The Orphean Society is not reborn, it is avenging itself." The last tongues of flame hissed out beneath a sheet of steam. Holmes turned away from the ruin, the burned fragment still clutched between his fingers. Our work, it seems, is not yet finished, for when illusion dies, the most dangerous act of all begins, the pursuit of truth unrestrained by morality. He glanced toward the river, its waters now bright under the lifting fog. "We must find her before London awakens to the spectacle she intends to stage. She no longer seeks to deceive, Watson. She seeks to unmask, and God help the city if she succeeds." The fog had thinned by evening, revealing the dim outlines of London's skyline. Chimneys like organ pipes, roofs glistening faintly beneath a reluctant moon. Holmes and I stood upon Westminster Bridge, the chill wind whipping at our coats. Below us, the Thames moved with quiet menace, carrying the city's secrets in its ceaseless flow. Somewhere beyond that mist-laced horizon, Miss LaRue moved unseen, her designs unfinished. Yet Holmes's stillness told me he had already drawn his conclusion, as inevitable as it was grave. "She will not flee abroad," he said at last. "Her purpose remains here." The Orphean Society was an infection born of London's appetite for spectacle. She intends to end it publicly, to show them all that illusion and corruption are but mirrors of one another. The question, Watson, is where she will raise the curtain. I followed his gaze to the north, the skyline of Piccadilly faintly visible, crowned by the ruins of the Egyptian Hall. "There," I murmured. Holmes smiled faintly. "Precisely. The site of the first performance must also host the last. The circle must close." By the time we reached Piccadilly, the streets were nearly deserted. The fire-charred facade of the Egyptian Hall loomed black against the moonlight. Holmes moved with caution through the wreckage, his lantern cutting through drifting motes of ash. The stage had been gutted, yet something new had been constructed upon it. A mirrored apparatus, gleaming like liquid under the flicker of the flame. Upon its surface, written in white chalk, was a single phrase: "For those who seek truth beyond illusion." "She means to broadcast her confession," Holmes said softly, "a final revelation before the eyes of the city." From behind the stage came a sound, a faint rustle, the scrape of fabric. Holmes lifted his revolver, but his voice remained calm. "Miss LaRue," he said, "the theater is empty. The audience has gone home. You may cease the performance." She stepped into the lamplight, pale but resolute, her expression serene. "You misunderstand, Mr. Holmes. The audience is never gone. It waits in every man who believes his world to be real. I mean only to show them what their faith conceals." "By destruction?" Holmes asked. "By revelation." She lifted a small device, an intricate lantern projector wired to the mirror's back. Within this are the names from Calverton's ledger, men who bought silence, influence, ruin. Tonight, London will see them all upon the wall. Holmes's tone sharpened. "You would burn them, as he did, only with light instead of fire." She hesitated. "Truth is the purer flame." Holmes took a step forward, lowering his weapon. "And yet, Miss LaRue, even the purest flame consumes indiscriminately. Innocent or guilty, the crowd will cheer as it always has. They do not seek truth, they seek sensation. Your revelation will serve only to feed the appetite you wish to destroy." Her gaze faltered. For a moment, the resolve in her face wavered, replaced by weariness. "Then what remains, Mr. Holmes, if not truth?" "Understanding," he said gently. "The world may never abandon its illusions, but we can learn to see through them without tearing down the stage." She looked at him for a long moment, then slowly turned the lantern aside. The mirror caught her reflection, fractured it into 100 ghostly faces. "Perhaps you are right," she murmured. "Perhaps illusion is mercy after all." She reached into her cloak, withdrew the serpent ring, and placed it on the edge of the stage. "Then let it end here." Before either of us could move, she stepped backward into the apparatus. The mirrors shifted, turning inward. A shimmer of light flickered. Then silence. When Holmes reached the frame, the space within was empty. The mirrors reflected only our own faces, pale and astonished. I felt a chill run through me. "Good Lord, Holmes. Where?" He examined the mechanism with grim fascination. A trap door, cleverly disguised. She prepared it days ago, perhaps even before the fire. But where it leads, we may never know. He turned to me, and for the first time in many years, I saw something like melancholy in his eyes. Some vanish not to deceive, Watson, but to escape the weight of their own truth. Outside, dawn was breaking. The fog lifted to reveal a city awakening, unaware that its greatest illusion had ended in silence. Holmes lingered on the threshold, watching as the first rays of sunlight touched the soot-stained walls. "Illusion and truth, Watson," he said quietly. "Two sides of the same mirror. Break one, and you see only yourself." He tucked the serpent ring into his pocket and turned toward the street. "Come, my friend, the stage is cleared, the curtain fallen. London has had its spectacle, though it never knew it." We walked back through the pale morning light, the sound of our footsteps echoing against the cobblestone. Behind us, the ruins of the Egyptian hall stood still and empty, save for the faint glint of shattered glass upon the stage, like the last reflection of a vanished magician's trick, or the final illusion of a world forever craving its mysteries.